seminar. My name is Jeffrey Owens. I head up the Global Tax Policy Center at the University of Vienna. And it's been a pleasure, in fact, to it's going to be a pleasure to sort of host this meeting. Just a few words of introduction. This book is the outcome of a 2-year cooperative program between the Vienna University and the World Bank. It's part of a broader program that we have, which includes the UNODC, on the whole question of how do you counter illicit financial flows, particularly in the African continent. I think what we've seen over the meetings that we've had with governments and with business over these 2-year period is interagency cooperation is really a key to effectively counteracting all forms of illicit financial flows, whether it's money laundering, bribery, corruption, or tax evasion. Yes, and I think the one of the things that has emerged from those discussions as well is that despite the fact that actually promoting interagency cooperation tends to be a low-hanging fruit, it's not that difficult to do in practice in many countries, particularly in developing and emerging economies. That it really doesn't work effectively very well, in part because I think the emphasis is more on competition between agencies than cooperation between agencies. And yet what we've seen is that interagency cooperation is a key factor in effective management of these type of activities. What this publication does is to identify some of the issues that governments have to face, that business have to face, that the enablers in this market have to face as well. And it looks at some of the best practices of a range of countries, developing and emerging economies. And also, it's also say some of the failures as well. Countries, in fact, that have tried something that hasn't succeeded as well. Yeah. We've tried to keep the publication very practical, which is why there are a lot of case studies there. We hope it's going to prove useful both to governments and to the private sectors and to academics as well. Yeah. I think with that, I'll pass the floor to Anna. We'll just say a few extra. Anna, you can have the floor now.
Thank you, Jeffrey, and welcome everyone. And on behalf of STAR and the World Bank, I would like to welcome good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. And I'm going to be very brief as well. I think globalization and digitalization has made interagency and international cooperation a keystone in fighting illicit financial flow. And actually, this cooperation is the network that the governments need to be more efficient, as Jeffrey was mentioning. And networks is how criminals work, actually, not only at the national level, but also in the international level. And the World Bank will strongly support this approach, interagency and international cooperation. And we work ourselves also to try to connect the dots, as is common said here at the bank. Why? Because the techniques and the schemes are very similar. In these crimes, the opacity, for example, of beneficial ownership in particular, is one of the instruments that is used by the criminals. And also how the professionals, the neighbors facilitate these crimes is also something that is common across all of the crimes. We not only develop knowledge product as this publication that we have done in collaboration with the Institute, but also we try to help the countries to put that in practice, and you will have the opportunity to hear from the first hand from some of the countries that we are working on today in the seminar. We try to help them to analyze, to identify risk associated to money laundering and tax evasion and other illicit financial flows, and also to try to help to enhance the capacity. As Jeffrey was saying, and I finish here, we try in this publication to compile best practices around the world, and I think is how we learn with the things that work and things that don't work, as Jeffrey was mentioning as well. So I stop here and I welcome you all to the seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for that. I mean, just just maybe one additional comment. One of the things that we looked at or try to identify in the study, well, what are the major barriers to interagency cooperation? And what we found were the three key things. Is one, sometimes there are laws and regulations that constrain what one agency can do vis-a-vis another agency. The second big barrier was technical platforms. Yes, the technical platform that may be used by the tax administration may be incompatible with the technical platform that's used by the financial intelligence unit. And the third barrier, which perhaps is the most important, was a question of culture. Is there a culture of openness? Is there a culture of transparency? Yeah? And we try to suggest some mechanisms by which, in fact, these barriers can be overcome. And the one thing that we did find that was very helpful in countries is what I call the informal cooperation. Being able to know your counterparts in other administrations, being able to go for coffee with them, yes, or drink with them, or anything with them, yeah, but just to establish that dialogue, because in many cases, the biggest barrier to this international interagency cooperation is a lack of trust between the agencies, yes. So personal contact, making an investment in those relationships is one of the key things, in fact, if you want to get effective cooperation. So with that, I'll pass the floor over to Jean-Pierre, who will take us into the second part of this afternoon session. How do we go about promoting a whole of government approach? Jean-Pierre, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. I hope you are hearing me well. If this is the case, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the speakers and all the attendants. We are that are here. We are very honored to have so many professionals, academics, researchers, students who are joining us today. This is great because we have worked a lot on this publication, a lot of work, and for a long time actually. So we are very, very happy to be able to present this work to such distinguished attendance. Thank you. So our publication on, we have called it Taxing Crime as the main title of the publication. It is about interagency cooperation, as Jeffrey just explained. I would say that more broadly, actually, it is about how you can maximize synergies and how you can get benefits from connecting more in-depth tax enforcement and anti-corruption and anti-money laundering policies. I know that we have a limited time, and I am not going to make a presentation with a PowerPoint, and I will just make two main remarks, and then I will let the floor to our colleague Sidesh, who is going to make a full presentation. I think my first remark, Jeffrey and colleagues, is that it is a great progress that we are speaking more often and more effectively about the synergies, and that the subject is becoming mainstream now. With all the work that the OECD has done on the topic, for example. I know that our colleagues from the IMF are also very interested in the topic, and they are already preparing a paper, I believe, on the topic. So we are on a topic that is definitely becoming key to the anti-corruption, the anti-tax evasion, and the anti-money laundering agenda. I am very happy for that because once upon a time, I started my career in 1990. It's not yesterday, as you can see.
You're such a young man, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Enthusiastic as well, yes.
This is times that many people here in this attendance couldn't know then. And I started this career in 1990 as a prosecutor specializing in white-collar crime and financial crime in a big city in France that is called Marseille. Very quickly, actually, and this is to say that the topic actually is not new at all. Very quickly, my prosecution office was involved in the first significant corruption and political financing scandals in France that were detected at this time, and that led France to make a lot of reforms to overhaul its system, actually. And how were these cases initiated? The cases were actually initiated because audits and tax verifications found that some companies, construction companies, had paid fictitious invoices to various entities, and these entities were linked to government officials and political parties, political parties. And these entities, having issued fictitious invoices, could receive with these fictitious invoices pretty real cash in exchange. And the cash, what happened to the cash? It was distributed as bribes to some government officials, or resent to political organizations. And all that was in exchange of the award of government contracts by the government officials. So you can see, the point is that you have cases that start basically with tax enforcement, because what's happening when you are putting fictitious invoices in your bookkeeping, what you are doing when you are construction companies, actually, it is extremely bad when you view it with the angle of taxes, because basically it means that you are reducing your revenues by fictional means, and then you are evading taxes, actually. And so you are starting with tax verifications, tax enforcement, tax detection, and then you, as you can see, you continue the case by going to corruption. I have to add that, of course, some of the funds that were paid to the government officials or sent to the structures that were linked to political parties, some of the funds first were transferred and held in bank accounts, of course, and sometimes they ended up as a reserve, if you wish, for future political campaigns in offshore bank accounts. For example, for France, it is very often Switzerland. It is a tradition when you are starting a money laundering transaction. Very often you speak about Switzerland. And so at the same time, you have a money laundering aspect to the case. So you can see how tax enforcement, corruption enforcement, and money laundering are very are interconnected, actually. And I am speaking again about the 1990s. at a period where actually the offense of money laundering was not even existing in the country. So it definitely doesn't make myself very young, but at least, but in any case, we always had an offense of possession and holding ill-gotten gains. That was an offense in itself, so that was not a problem. It could be prosecuted as such. So all that to say that that the connection is extremely strong. And when you are doing tax enforcement, it's very important to think that you can go and continue towards anti-corruption and anti-money laundering enforcement. And actually, symmetrically, you can have a corruption case or a money laundering case when you are starting with the enforcement of the money laundering and corruption offenses, and it can lead you very easily, actually. I mean, not easily when you are doing the investigation, believe me, but conceptually and intellectually, you can see very easily that you can go towards tax enforcement. For example, you have this famous case that is more recent in France a few years ago, where we had the Minister of Budget who was, I mean, where it was detected that the French Minister of Budget had bank account in Switzerland and could not explain very properly why he had these bank accounts in Switzerland. And the prosecution office started a money laundering case, and in the end, the investigations was relatively effective and relatively quick, and very quickly it happened that the minister admitted that the money actually was actually tax evasion, because it was revenues that he had received from a professional activity. And so as the result, he was convicted of money laundering of tax crime. So you can see here, you can start with a money laundering case, basically, and you are, because, and in the end, the tax administration could recover the tax that was due on this undeclared revenue. So you can go also symmetrically from money laundering and enforcement to the recovery of taxes. So that was my first remark, and I am trying to make in 2 minutes my second remark. There are obstacles, of course, to using these synergies. These obstacles are that you need, and sometimes you don't have, close enough coordination or integration of tax enforcement and corruption, money laundering enforcement. It requires first cultural changes to avoid the tendency of agencies to function in silos, each of them pursuing only their own objectives without having the big picture, and promoting that the agencies work also having in mind this big picture is very important. And it means also training, it means organizational reforms, it means, for example, organizing task forces or organizing joint investigative teams between tax enforcers and law enforcement and FIUs and prosecutors. Sometimes it requires also providing sufficient resources, budgets, human resources to the relevant agencies, while ensuring the integrity of all these enforcement bodies. And as cross-border cases are also very frequent, all that requires being able to use international exchange of information instruments, all the instruments, both in criminal mutual legal assistance and tax exchange of information that have been developed in the recent years. Since the 1990s, definitely a lot has been done in this context. I will, and of course, it requires adequate legislation. It requires adequate legislation for authorizing, encouraging, and sometimes mandating the exchange of information between relevant agencies. So this is a full program, as you see, when you want to use these synergies. And I will finish by only one example of changes of practices that can be done. As you know, FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, has made tax crimes a predicate offense of money laundering, which was an important step in the recent years. But if you read the mutual evaluations of countries, sometimes the reader can be a little bit disappointed by the use of money laundering with predicate offenses linked to tax evasion. Actually, there are the prosecutions and convictions are sometimes much more scarce than expected. And one of the reasons is that many jurisdictions have legal challenges and even cultural challenges in identifying the proceeds of crime related to tax crimes, actually. So that's one of the issues that they have. And we were discussing that in another online meeting in the Malta workshops. What I said to the people who raised this obstacle, look, money laundering, for example, you are speaking about proceeds of crime, but it is not only proceeds of crime, money laundering. It is also the laundering of instruments of crime. So when you cannot identify money or bank accounts as proceeds of crime, you can very often use the concept of instruments of the crime, because definitely when you are transferring money to avoid taxes, the money becomes an instrument of the crime that you are committing. Sometimes with small adjustments using the existing standards and legislation, you can do a lot, actually. It's not only about changing all the laws and all the practices, but sometimes small adjustments in the way you see the issues is key. And I will conclude on this. And we hope that our publication will help on these adjustments and maybe on more ambitious reforms. Thank you. And I know that Sidesh is ready.
Yeah, Sidesh, just one thing, just the agencies, because I mean, you know, we've talked about interagency cooperation, but what are the key agencies here? It's the tax administration, it's the customs departments, it's the financial intelligence units, exchange departments, central banks, police, the courts. Yeah, I mean, in some countries you can get 10 or 11. In Nigeria, there are 11 agencies that are involved in countering illicit financial flows. And of course, the more the agencies there are, the more difficult the cooperation becomes. Sid, over to you. Let's try to do it in 10 minutes if you can.
Yeah, I'll be really short. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Siddhesh Rao, and I'm one of the co-authors of the book. I'm a PhD researcher at WEU Global Tax Policy Center of Vienna University of Economics and Business. And this topic of the book, as well as the session, Taxing Crime, a whole of a government approach, deals with enhancing interagency cooperation between tax authorities, law enforcement agencies, effectively to combat tax evasion, corruption, and money laundering. Interagency cooperation, it touches upon several issues, including beneficial ownership, unexplained wealth order, and from time to time, all policy options suggest that improved cooperation is one of the best ways to tackle money laundering, whether it's IFF, whether it's tax evasion. So cooperation is the key to counter IFF. So what is the overarching objective of the book? We have drafted this with an aim to showcase some of the good practices which countries can quickly implement rather than starting from scratch, and to act as a tool needed for enhanced cooperation in the fight against corruption, money laundering, and tax crime. How this book can be used? This book includes good practices as well as recommendations in improving the effectiveness of government actions by providing practical recommendations which can be implemented easily and quickly. It provides good practices, case studies, as well as MOUs that agency can use to establish interagency cooperation at the national as well as international level. And most of all, it's not just useful for senior policymakers, but also useful to law practitioners, including law enforcement officials, investigators, magistrates, and prosecutors. So why taxing crimes? Many criminal activities, including corruption, money laundering, and fraud, have a tax crime component and consist of allowing individuals or companies to benefit from undeclared or untaxed income. Tax authorities can be an important allies in combating corruption, money laundering, and other financial crimes. But the problem is tax authorities are not always aware of these typical indicators of corruption, money laundering, or other financial crimes which are not related to taxes. FATF, the global standard setter for money laundering, has explicitly, as Jean-Pierre previously mentioned, has explicitly recognized the linkage between tax crimes and money laundering, and it added tax crimes to the list of designated predicated offenses. And effective interagency cooperation is the lowest hanging fruit in terms of policy options that can deliver better results in shorter time frames with lower cost using really fewer resources. So this is a basic background about what is the main purpose of the book and to whom the book is being addressed to. This is the main structure of the book. It consists of 3 parts. First, it talks about exchange of information channels for tax and criminal investigations. Second, it focuses on interagency asset recovery strategy combining tax and financial crime prosecution. And third, it suggests developing interagency exchange of information at the national as well as international level. And in the end, it sums up with all and provides key recommendations to make interagency cooperation effective. So here are the key recommendations of the book in brief. First, for how to overcome legal barriers to information exchange. First, countries can develop legislative framework that can formally link tax crime to broader financial crimes. Second, a legislation to share tax audit findings with other agencies and vice versa. For example, legislation to share criminal investigation findings with tax authorities. Both could go a long way in overcoming the legal barrier. The third is having internal standard operating procedures governing the interagency exchange of information, specifying the nature of information to be shared, what is the time frame within which that information needs to be shared, and the exact steps that needs to be followed could be a good practice that countries could follow in overcoming these legal barriers. Next, how to overcome the operational barriers to information exchange. As I mentioned before, countries can adopt formal models for cooperation. What those formal models are: memorandum understandings, service level agreements, joint investigative teams, joint task forces, or even joint training interventions where both where personnel of different agencies train together and intervene together. Again, training and awareness building is also a crucial step. And most importantly, what we have seen is establishing secure IT system. It's an important step to overcome operational barriers when sharing information within different agencies. Establishing joint task forces is also a good practice, which has seen a good feedback in few countries, and having a joint task force is really a good practice which countries can implement based on the experiences of other countries. How to overcome cultural and political barriers? It helps to do a balancing effort to promote trust and cultural buy-in, to exchange information between tax and law enforcement agencies with confidentiality, privacy, and data protection concerns. Using all relevant sources of information and the international instruments to conduct international cooperation in tax matters can also help in overcoming cultural and political barriers to information exchange. The other key recommendation could be introducing laws to expand information gathering possibilities, including those related to mandatory disclosure regimes, MDR as they are called, for the use of aggressive tax avoidance schemes also helps. Other key recommendations include adopting unexplained wealth laws that could provide authorities with the power to query a person's income or wealth that has no known sources within a sound legal regime, could help in overcoming cultural and political barriers. At last, to enhance collection of important information. There are 4 key recommendations to enhance collection of important information. The first is developing a legislative framework like unexplained wealth order to recover unexplained wealth. Second, questions in tax forms of politically exposed persons or their close relatives. Mandatory disclosure rules to target aggressive tax avoidance schemes, and most importantly, introducing beneficial ownership framework. These are some of the good practices that countries could implement to enhance collection of important information. And this is from me. Thank you so much. And I look forward to any of your comments. Jeffrey, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sid, and thank you, Jean-Pierre, as well. I think that's provided you with an overview, in fact, of what's being covered by the book. We'll now move into the third and last session, in fact, which is really about what a country experiences. We're going to hear from Yara from the World Bank, Dominique from the Kenyan Revenue Authority, Irene from the Uganda Revenue Authority, and Paul from Mauritius. Yes? We'll kick off with Yara. About 10 minutes, please, Yara, and then once we've gone through the presentations, we'll come and have some time for questions and answers. I may even have some questions and answers before we move on to the very end of the session. So let's go ahead. Yara, nice and short, please.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm just going to introduce a little bit of the work that we have been doing in implementing all the concepts that are developed in the book into actual technical assistance that the World Bank has been providing, and it's been quite interesting. I think this is particularly a good moment to talk about this because I just returned last week from our first in-person workshop with our colleagues from Kenya and Uganda on joining forces between tax crimes and anti-money laundering and anti-corruption. We had a very productive 1-week workshop. It's funny that Jean-Pierre mentioned that the first cases that started to come up where they used this whole of government approach in France were related to the construction sector, because we actually spent 1 week working on a practical exercise that simulated an investigation in the construction sector that involved fraud, corruption, tax crimes, money laundering, everything that you can think
name
of.
it and it was there, yes?
It was a very, very interesting week with our colleagues. Yes, especially because as we will see in a minute, both the KRA and the URA have used the whole of government approach already many times and have been very successful in investigating tax crimes and money laundering together. So a few years ago, when Jean-Pierre was starting with this idea of this publication, that he was very shy and humble about it. He was only going to write a blog. And then we started talking about this, and it ended up becoming this big endeavor along with our colleagues in Vienna. We were also starting to look into developing technical assistance for implementing these principles of bringing together a whole of government approach. So very much in line with this idea that we wanted to spread about a whole of government approach to investigations. We had a whole World Bank approach to this project, and we joined forces with our colleagues from the tax unit. So the anti-money laundering people, the tax people, and also STAR Initiative, so anti-corruption. We put together this project to deliver in East Africa, where we would look at the risks of tax crimes and money laundering from tax crimes in both Kenya and Uganda. At the time, Anna and I had started working on a module for our broader national risk assessment of money laundering at the World Bank that we turned into this standalone assessment for tax crimes and money laundering from tax crimes, or actually, more accurately, tax evasion and money laundering from tax crimes, because as Anna mentioned before, the methods used by criminals to evade paying taxes are the same that are used to commit tax crimes. So we decided to keep it broad like that. And we have been working with our colleagues in Kenya and Uganda in a pilot program with this module. So based on the results from the module, we thought, well, now we can tailor this technical assistance into specifically what is needed. We ended up doing it in parallel, and our colleagues had already identified the construction sector as a high risk for them. So we put together this program, and we have been meeting throughout the pandemic. We had a number of remote sessions that proved for us at least to be extremely interesting and productive. And then based on all of those remote sessions, we ended up putting together the practical program that we hope now to be able to also deliver to colleagues in other countries in the region and beyond. We actually have a plan to implement something similar in East Asia in 2023, start working with our colleagues in East Asia. I have learned a lot from the KRA and the URA through this process, and I have been quite inspired by the way in which they interact with the Financial Reporting Center in Kenya, the Financial Intelligence Agency in Uganda, and also with colleagues from other agencies. For example, in our workshop 2 weeks ago, we had colleagues from the EACC, which is the anti-corruption agency in Kenya, and we also had colleagues from the Road Construction Agency from Uganda as well. So it was incredibly interesting for us and enriching to participate in this 1 week workshop with them. I think probably the most important lesson that I can rescue from this process is that not just for governments, for investigative agencies, this whole of government approach is quite useful, but also for us at the World Bank, this whole of World Bank approach has been incredibly useful as well in delivering technical assistance to our colleagues in a number of countries. So I don't want to take the floor for too long because I know that they have these very interesting cases that they want to share. And their experience is really worth listening to, but we have been working more and more on this topic, both on the investigative side, as I mentioned, like with projects like this one. Also, we've been working a lot on beneficial ownership as it affects both tax evasion and money laundering and anti-corruption as well. So we have been supporting countries over the last couple of years as well in assessing risks of abuse of legal entities, and also in drafting legislation to come up to the revised FATF recommendations 24 and 25, All of this, in a way, has become integrated into the support that we have been giving all of the countries that we have been supporting on this taxing crime workflow that we've started a few years ago with just a few of us from different World Bank units. So I don't want to take the floor for too long. Let me just give the floor now to our colleagues who have, I'm sure, very interesting experiences to share with us. And Jeff, I'll just return.
Okay. Thanks for that. Yeah, that was quite an interesting one, particularly given that you're freshly back, in fact, from Africa. Dominique, do you want to tell us a little bit more then about the Kenyan Revenue Authority experience? Dominique, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Yara, and the speakers. And thank you for the welcome. I'm excited to be part of this panel. And first of all, what I would like to say is that I have about a handful of practical experiences. I have been in the discussions for not very long. I think this is now my 17th year. And all through, the best I have learned and up to where I am right now is that I started off with the police and going into the banking fraud for about 5 years, and I came back to the taxing authority, and all that's been financial fraud. So one thing that is most exciting is now coming to taxing of crimes, taxing of crimes. And in Kenya, we use the Al Capone model, and that's everybody coming to this country will get that example, that we will be interested in taxing all activities, legal or illegal.
Yep.
And what we go for is that tax knows no morals. So whether it's corruption, whether it is money laundering, you have to pay our taxes. This has two advantages. One is that some of the laws we have in the country, it is not obviously like any other country, pinning down economic crimes is not very easy using just one statute. But when you approach them through taxes, through money laundering, through corruption, at least as they run away from one, they find themselves in another. And in this one, we have 4 main scenarios. One is in the construction sector, a project that has largely been supported by Yara's team, and it's now the 3rd year in that engagement. They have really done a lot of capacity enhancement. I think we have trained a total of 162 care staff and other Kenyans, not just from the Kenya Revenue Authority, but I'll just talk about that. And we have had rounds of sessions virtually until 2 weeks ago. We made it physical now, working with Uganda. So in the construction sector, how we have managed to survive through this is that, you see, for corruption, charging someone for corruption is not very easy, because of the mere reason that corruption is big money crime. It's big people crime. So as they collude with the engineers to falsify the records, what we realized is that they end up with a lot of profits. And these profits, they also don't want to pay tax in the process. So in that aspect, in their desire to reduce taxes, they end up forging documents. And therefore, they become liable for criminal charges of forgery. And now, to avoid that, they end up being left with more taxes to pay. So for us, we have used that model we are fighting corruption using tax crime or tax evasion. Now, the other item that we do, which has yielded quite a number of a huge amount of taxes. One, I'll talk about the practical scenarios of 3 cases. One case was, because they have been highly publicized, and I don't think there's anything wrong if I give the real examples. We had a case of a public official who was in charge of the finances of the city of Nairobi, the county. So the head of finance had been involved in massive corruption. The anti-corruption agency was following him to confiscate his assets. But because the anti-corruption laws require that you have to go through court and prove your case and come back for you to confiscate the assets, the tax laws are different. We don't need to go to court. Our laws allow us to freeze the accounts for up to 10 days without a court order. And now that enabled the anti-corruption agency to quickly move and consolidate the evidence as we held the funds for 10 days and extended that for 6 months and again for another 2 years. So finally, when the anti-corruption team were able to get their evidence, we had started parallel tax investigations and we confiscated the whole amount. It's not really a lot, but it was 400,000 US dollars. By Kenyan standards, that's around 40 million. And it's not very little, although it's not a lot. But it sent a message that even if the corruption case collapses or doesn't move as fast, the tax case went ahead and we were able to tax that crime and recover all that money. So that's why I said the two advantages. One is that we get revenue, at the same time discouraging the other economic crimes. The same was said of a case of one of the agencies in government called the National Youth Service. It's like police or something like that. Yeah, National Youth Service. So this agency had cases of corruption. The suppliers, there were issues of people supplying nothing to the youth service and getting paid. So the payments went on and on until it was around 400 million Kenyan shillings. That should be $4 million. So what we did using the whole government approach, we have 8 agencies under the whole government approach. KRA is one of them. Then the National Police is there, Anti-Corruption Agency, FRC, Central Bank of Kenya, the Attorney General's Office, Asset Recovery Agency, all of them. What we normally do in a case of that, when it's under the MAT, multi-agency framework, each of these institutions is given their specific mandates. You do as per your mandate. And if I look at POCAMLA, POCAMLA is the Proceeds of Crime and Money Laundering Act, Section 55, makes it mandatory for all investigative agencies to cooperate. So if you get a request, you must respond, whether formal or informal. So that section is the bond that we use to work as a whole government approach. Now, the tax element here, to be more specific, was that as the investigations were going on, the corruption cases, the criminal cases by the police, the KRA was specific to taxing those crimes. As the asset recovery agency was going on with the recovery of the assets and the money laundering aspects, as the KRA, we were specific to collection of taxes. And 17 cases have so far been concluded, and they are at various stages of collection of taxes, regardless of the criminal cases that are going on in court. That one has not been challenged in court as done for jeopardy or any kind, and it's a success story in this country. So that's where we are, and it is working. The other case that we looked at was involving a mall. There's a big mall in the city of Nairobi. It's called Eastleigh Mall, for those who come to this country. So in this mall, it was built on public land. And so the first thing was, as the anti-corruption agencies are looking at how the land was acquired and issues of corruption in the lands ministry, we went into taxing the proceeds from the mall itself. So we were taxing the crimes that were being investigated by the anti-corruption agency and the National Police in regards to the documents and whether they were forgery or something. So for us, we find taxing crime as something that is really beautiful. I mean, it's a success story. We have worked on it, and it's giving results. So finally, the 8 agencies that we have spoken about, there are cases which they normally handle, cases which are directly under whole government approach. So far, we have 26 of them. They are monitored on a monthly basis. Each of the 8 institutions says what they have done about it. We say what taxes we have collected as the anti-corruption continue with the stages they are in. And this is going on a monthly basis of reporting until the cases are brought to the end as the others are being onboarded as we proceed. So from a
two minutes, please, Dominic, 2 minutes. I know you have a long story to tell, but I want to give people time to ask you some questions as well, yeah?
Thank you, Prof. So actually, I come to the end of what I had prepared because it will be in a presentation form. So that is what we can say about the Kenyan situation and how practical it is that we are applying the whole government approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I like what you were saying about the whole issue that there's an obligation to cooperate, yes? That I think is so important. I think one can add also is that for, when an agency asks another agency for information and gets that information, there should almost be an obligation to report back on how they've used that information, yeah? So it's a two-way reporting back. I'm going to pause there for a moment to see if there's anybody who has any questions for Dominic on the Kenyan experience, and then we'll move and we'll go to Uganda. Any comments or questions for Dominic? Just put your, Anna, can you have a glance at the chat to see if there's any questions coming up there? There was one question that came. What about the issue of the protection of human rights? Has that become an issue in Kenya? That's on the chat show. Protection of human rights. Has that constrained what you've been able to do?
Thank you, Prof. Quickly, if I could answer those questions. Actually, on the feedback loop, yes, that is also part of the obligations placed. Only that is not in the law. For the one in the law is an obligation to cooperate. That one must be done. But in terms of giving feedback, it is part of the reporting mechanism that is done on a monthly basis. And talking of the mutual evaluation that was done recently, one of the things the assessment team was looking at is that feedback. After getting this information, how have you given back the feedback? Because it's also used for evaluation of those other agencies. So yes, the issue of feedback is being addressed. Lastly, in regard to human rights, we haven't had a challenge about human rights. And that's why I said nobody has gone to court to challenge this approach, because I think it's people driven as much as it's government driven, because each of the agencies are doing as per their mandates. And at no point is there double jeopardy, because taxes have to be paid anyway. And then the residual amounts of what might be forfeited by the asset recovery agency. Prof?
That's really helpful to have. There's quite a few other questions, but I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to move on to Uganda, and then we'll come back to some of these questions on the chat show. So, would you like to tell us a little bit about the experience of the Ugandan Revenue Authority? Over to you. Is she on, Yara?
It's Agnes. Agnes is there. She is.
Yep. Go ahead.
Yes. Hello. Can
Agnes,
you hear me?
Go ahead. Yes.
Yes. I'm representing on behalf of Irene. She was not able to present, so I was given the responsibility to do this. I'm the Assistant Commissioner Tax Investigation, Uganda Revenue Authority. And this is actually what we've done. From the discussions and the submission from our colleagues, I think probably I prepared so much more than what I ought to have actually zeroed on. So maybe, is there somebody helping me to share the presentation? I'll run through it quickly and then summarize on what we have actually done in respect to what we are shared. Yeah. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, that's just an overview of economic crime in the Ugandan way, how we view it, our role as a tax body, Uganda Revenue Authority, in fighting tax crime, and then accomplishments, and then the way forward. that's what I'm going to share. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is just a general overview, but maybe just the emphasis on Uganda. I will not go into the statistics, but what I would summarize to say that the areas that we've seen a manifestation of tax crime and effects on tax evasion has been mainly on trade misinvoicing. It has really been so significant in the area of illicit financial flows, and approximately 18% of total Ugandan trade. So, and for the last few years, misinvoicing actually has been a serious challenge in our tax administration. And then, of course, what Dominic highlighted, a lot of document fraud and falsification. So I just wanted to emphasize on that. Next, please. This is just contextualization of tax crime as far as our business here is concerned, but of course, the source is OECD. I don't want to go into that. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, now the Uganda Revenue Authority, whereas we are fighting tax crime, we have taken on the comprehensive compliance approach, noting that our taxpayers are categorized in different areas of the pyramid as seen there. So the focus on tax crime is basically at the APEC where I sit. And these are mainly the taxpayers that have purposed and have vowed never to comply. And of course, that's how they either intentionally or in a corrupt way work out ways to beat the tax system. So the tax investigation, we target this particular category of taxpayers, and we try to see how we can investigate and later on prosecute them. Now, the way we are instituted, we investigate, but then the prosecution is handled by another department, but still, because of the arrangement Uganda Revenue Authority has had with the director, the director of public prosecution, we have been given that mandate. So within URA, within Uganda Revenue Authority, we actually have the prosecution arm. So the cases don't need to go to DPP, that we actually handle the prosecution. And we are able to do that very, very well. Next, please. Yeah, so our core mandate as URA is basically concerned with the tax crime. And this has been, of course, as already highlighted, has been a predicate offense to money laundering. And as I'll share later our experience, you'll see that we are trying actually to see how we can equally prosecute money laundering. Because as a tax crime, we have actually done a little well, but we just need to see how to build the evidences so that we are able actually to prosecute also money laundering. So our responsibility is basically in directing and conducting investigations of tax crime, which is placed under the tax investigation department. And then we collaborate with other agencies in that process. And these are some of the agencies that we collaborate with: the Financial Intelligence Unit, that's the authority, the Uganda Police, the Uganda Defense, the Uganda People's Defense Force, the Uganda Communications, the Inspector General Government, Inspector of Government Agencies, Internal Security Organs, the DPP, the National Social Security Funds, the Interpol and Immigration. So we are actually trying to build a strong collaboration amongst the agencies. And like Dominic highlighted, whereas the Kenyan scenario seems a little more advanced and is already working, as Uganda, we are still actually trying to see that all these agencies actually come together and work to see that we, at the end of the day, we can actually prosecute such cases. Now, Dominic highlighted that they already even have a support a legal support in the area of asset recovery. But as far as Uganda is concerned, that law has not yet been passed. Actually, it is on the table being discussed at our parliament, so it has not yet been enacted. So implementation of prosecuting and recovering the assets that either public servants have corruptly gained or obtained, it is still a gray area, but we are pursuing to see that we should be able actually to recover. And we believe that if we can only be able to recover those assets, then in itself, it will actually fight corruption. So we found scenarios where government officials or public officials have actually amassed a lot of money and gotten those ill-gotten assets, but we cannot touch them, even when they are prosecuted on corruption, but we are not yet able to recover those assets. So, and our prosecution, like I already said, we have been given that responsibility as Uganda Revenue Authority. So we are able actually to prosecute those cases because the DPP has given us that mandate as an institution. Let's go ahead, please. So in combating money laundering, Uganda Revenue Authority, basically we work closely with Financial Intelligence Authority, and our work basically is the Financial Intelligence Authority helps us in the end of the cross-border management, movements of currencies and any instruments that are above 30 million Uganda shillings, which when that is seen, they actually channel it to us. And also with Financial Intelligence Authority, because the banks are required to report any suspicious transactions in their banks, whenever they investigate and suspect elements of money laundering, such cases are sent to tax investigation. So that's how we've been able to work with the Financial Intelligence Authority. They're actually our support. They support us in identifying those cases and handing them over to us. In 2021, a specialized unit was created under the Tax Investigation Department, specifically to address money laundering cases. So we believe that we should be able to be successful come probably by end of this financial year, because so far we have received 26 cases and 10 of them have been completed. We've ably identified the tax components of the crime, but we are yet to prove the money laundering. So, so far we have 2 cases being evaluated by our legal team to test and see whether we can actually take on these 2 cases and prosecute money laundering. We've not yet successfully prosecuted any of the cases, but we believe that this is an area that we could venture in and be able to come up with the tangible results by the end of this financial year. Next, please. So in the effort to get information beyond our borders, like other administrations have done, we have been able to closely work with OECD and equally with competent authorities, and we've been able to engage in the international cooperation where there's exchange of information. We've had exchange of information on request, and now we are pursuing the automatic exchange of information. Now, through that, we've actually seen that there are certain businesses, especially the international tax businesses, where we see a lot of aggressive tax planning because of the because of the international corporate companies, what's the word?
Multinationals.
The multinationals, thank you, the multinationals. We've seen this already beginning to yield results. And so far from 2014, when we started the exchange of information, we've so far been able to handle 171 cases. 47 from customs, and 124 from domestic taxes. And the revenue, of course, support that we have already been able to register over 189 billion Uganda shillings. So we've seen that collaboration, the international collaboration is actually also a window that is helping us to tap into the monies either that have been laundered or that probably would not be able to see. Next, please. Okay.
I think that's the end, yes.
So I'm going now to the actual, what we have done so far, our accomplishments. I'm about to close. Now, our accomplishments, as you can see from the statistics, 2019, 2020, 2020, 2021, our revenue recovery actually has been going up. And even the number of investigated cases have been going up. So far, we've had 44 cases prosecuted. Now, just to highlight on the construction sector that Yara talked about and where the World Bank is supporting us. When we began with capacity building, which was done so well throughout the lockdown. And when the team appreciated the skills that had been passed on by World Bank, we actually we tried out implementing those skills. And so far, 6 cases have been completed where we've identified over 14 million US dollars. But I must make a comment here that we have not successfully prosecuted any of the cases. And maybe the reason here still goes back to the commitment of other agencies, how much they're actually committed to see that we prosecute these cases. And most of them actually politically exposed persons. When you look at the construction companies that we actually investigated, you see a lot of connection in the political offices. So it's an area we've not yet succeeded, but the revenues we've been able to identify and collected them. And so far we have about 19 cases that are ongoing. But with the training we had 2 weeks ago, we really want to see how we can crack this and at least prosecute some of these cases. And as I'm about to conclude, the element of prosecuting money laundering, identifying, confirming money laundering is still an area that we are struggling. And we believe that with the continuous engagement with other stakeholders, the support we are receiving, and the other agencies coming on board, we should be able to successfully do that. We are working closely with FIA, and that's an area we want to really see that we crack. So we have recently had creation of interagency working group. So far we had 1 symposium, and next week, I think a week from now, we shall be having another engagement where all these government agencies can come together and actually we fight the same enemy irrespective of the different mandates that each of the agencies have. So we believe in such a forum, we should be able to push for ability to see that we combat tax crime and equally looking at it as a predicate offense to money laundering. So with those few comments, I want to take the opportunity to thank you, and we thank World Bank for the support. And we believe that the joint effort, the collaboration, both national and international, is the way to go if we must really fight money laundering and the tax crime. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Agnes. That was a real fascinating presentation. I can see Uganda's made enormous progress over the last 5 years. The 1 or 2 quick questions that come up on the chat for Agnes. One is what do you mean by trade mispricing? I mean, I know what that means, but maybe you want to just say a word about that. And then the second question was, what's your legal basis for the action that you're taking? Yeah, did you put in new legislation or did you use the existing legislation? The two questions that are coming from the audience.
Okay, thank you for the question. Misinvoicing, basically, I would say it's related to fictitious or missing trader. For instance, let me give an example. I have a company and I create that there's another company called B, and then I'll claim that I have actually made a sale to B and actually create an invoice to show that I've made a sale to B, and yet actually B is non-existent. Yeah. So I'll be able, so that's what we actually call misinvoicing. And the second question, I didn't get it very well. If you could just re-echo.
It was what is the legal basis for the actions that you take for cooperating with your colleagues in other departments? Do you have legislation that permits that cooperation?
Now, we had a pronouncement by the head of state that all the law enforcement agencies actually we are supposed to be working together, but we've not gotten a legal or a position like the one KRA was emphasizing to really require as a mandate for the agencies to work together. But that besides the point, the holistic government approach, the government has been encouraging all the agencies to work together, but we've not documented, we've not come up with a legal document to really mandate any agency to support. But in our own informal engagement and ability to formalize, we've actually done a lot of engagements, agents to agents engagement, and then be able to appreciate how they can actually support us. So the informal approach has helped us if we are to get information, and thereafter we actually formalize them. But we don't have any legal position that mandates that kind of exchange of information.
Thank you very much for that. I think the other thing I find quite interesting was the fact that you established a special unit within the tax administration to deal with money laundering. I mean, that's something I think is, not many countries have done that. So I think it may be something that we might have more information on at one point. Any other questions? Any other questions on that? I think that was, I'm just looking at the chat to see if there's anything else. Oh, there was a question. Sorry, there was a question for Sid on fusion centers. What do you, Sid, do you want to just tell us very briefly what you mean by fusion centers?
Fusion centers is a combination of a center where personnel from different departments, they come together, they train together, and they collaborate on a different issues together. So it's much more of people with a different expertise coming together.
Think of it a bit like a marriage with a large family. They're all together all the time. Yes, Angus, you wanted to have a last comment?
Yes, I just wanted to share the way forward. I think I missed that out. So the way forward is that in this collaboration with law agencies, we are actually pursuing to see that we conduct joint investigations, joint surveillance and investigations. And we believe that when we start together with them, they will actually be able to embrace and support until the end. And we're also looking at joint capacity building. And that's why in Nairobi, when World Bank held that workshop, we actually came along with other agencies. We had financial intelligence, we had the National Roads Authority. And the intention is just basically for us to speak the same language, to appreciate each other's need as we fight crime. And also we are reviewing our legal framework to strengthen investigation powers and offenses that are related. And we believe that in that, we should be able actually to see success in the area of fighting tax crime and money laundering. And of course, in that, when we talk about tax crime, money laundering, corruption does not miss. I did not make mention of that, but it's a given. Most times we find either the staff are involved or there is some kind of office where processing or issues of contracts, and you really find that corruption is playing a great deal. But all these engagements with the Inspector General, Government General Office, the DPP, the intelligence, the Financial Intelligence Authority, all these are just bringing all of us together to see that as we handle tax crime, there is IGG, whose role is to prosecute public officials. So we are trying to bring that collaboration that whenever we are working on a case, if there's a public official involved, there's an agency ready to take them on. Thank you very much.
I think that's really a great way to end. The emphasis on it. We need a whole of government approach. All government departments should have the same aim. In fact, that's to effectively counter any form of illicit financial flows. Look, we'll move on and we'll move to Paul from Mauritius. Do you want to give us a brief outline, Paul, of what Mauritius has been doing? If you can do it in about 10 minutes, that'd be great. And I know you have some slides.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeffrey. What I'm going to talk about is the correlation, we think, between unexplained wealth and tax crime. And I hope to show interagency cooperation. Sid, next slide, please. Sid? Thank you. Okay, it's interesting to set the scene because the modus operandi, the way we operate with the tax authority, is that the tax authority realizes that otherwise gainfully employed citizens may suffer selective amnesia when they're filling out their tax returns. So they will help them regain their memory and they'll charge them a fee for doing so, which is the unpaid tax plus a penalty. Now, the agency is concerned with unexplained wealth, which is wealth which cannot be satisfactorily accounted for. Now, if the tax authority has any reason to believe or suspect that wealth has been illicitly accumulated, they refer the matter to the agency. And we are not concerned with gainfully employed people. We're concerned that respondents can show they can satisfactorily account for their ownership, custody, and possession of property. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I don't think I'll have the time, but if I do, I'll show two case studies. One is illicit proceeds of crime, drug in this case, and where the agency received a lot of help and assistance from the tax authority, and then we reciprocated in the next case study. Sid, please, thank you. Okay, the first case is linked to the largest drug seizure in Mauritian history, and the chief movers of this, the brains behind it, were three brothers and their spouses. And before the drugs were actually found in Mauritius, the police had run an intelligence-led operation and raided the premises of one of the relatives of one of the brothers and found a safe hidden beneath a wooden structure. It contained millions of rupees, hundreds of thousands of dollars, thousands of euros, precious metals and stones, and a stun gun, ostensibly to be used for self-defense. Now, as soon as we received the referral from the police with regards to the cash and the precious stones and metals, we started investigating the family and their associates' movable and immovable properties. Sid, if you'd be so kind. So it was the size of the drug seizure meant that although the brothers were kind of like soldiers in a transnational drug smuggling network, because there was a huge amount of heroin and hashish seized, which would have swamped the Mauritian market. So, and it was immediately obvious that these people had been schooled in the rudiments of anti-money laundering or money laundering. They used their own cash and operated cash-intensive businesses, taxis, pleasure craft, hairdressers, salons. They made retail fish sales. They had a complex web of interconnected property holdings, possibly as a means of trying to defeat the agency's attempts to, or anybody's attempts to pin too much property on one or two people. They used very, very complex funding arrangements. They seemed to be very friendly with visiting foreigners who were falling over themselves to give them cash loans, unconditional cash loans, interest-free cash loans, which they never seemed to want to get repayment for over several years. The brothers were also phenomenally lucky gamblers, had the capacity to bilocate or trilocate, in the sense that they could place winning bets within a few minutes of each other at 3 or 4 bookmakers. They also received wedding gifts from people in the Mauritian, wedding gifts from people in the Mauritian diaspora in Europe, who were then uncontactable. And all this cash and all these precious stones and metals were to be used to purchase an unnamed foreign fishing boat where we didn't know the location. So that was more or less it. Sid, if you would kindly. So what did the tax authority do? Well, the tax authority was happy that there was an illicit source of funds given the size of the drug seizure. So they gave us the detailed company tax returns, tax computations, financial accounts for 5 companies that were owned by family members by different degrees for the past 6 years. The 3 brothers and their spouses, we had all their tax returns for the last 7 years. The tax returns for family members similarly, and some of their associates. And I should have written tax returns. We had one foreign funder of an alleged loan, and he's resident in Mauritius, and we got his tax returns for the last 7 years, in fact. Sid, if I may. So we actually ended up serving over 25 statutory requests on 10 family members and their associates. And what they had actually done was say that the family members own 10% of this, another family member would own 25%, they were registered owners, but when they were faced with a statutory request to show the source of the funds that they used to acquire the property or their share of the property, they were utterly unable of supporting their affidavit of earnings. So we instantly, well, as soon as we could, not with the COVID lockdowns and all the rest of it, we had an unexplained wealth application approved for the cash and the precious metals and stones. And we have separate reports which are going to be put before the court in January for the immovable property, land, and immovable properties of cars, pleasure craft, and fishing boats. And we found from bitter experience that judges, although very talented, are often not particularly numerate. And so we have to try and simplify a lot of these cross holdings and give it to them in bite-sized chunks. So I'm quite confident that the aim of what we're doing is to clean the family out. So
that's a very strong thing there, Paul. Yes, clean the family out. Yes.
Yes. I'm sorry. We fight to win, and if they can properly explain, and properly support their ownership of the property, then they can expect to lose it. And I make and especially if we're not talking about a bit of thieving or something like that. We're talking about heroin, and if I can, I'll clean them out. But it's not my choice. It's the court that will have to decide. I may be motivated, but I don't have that power. Jeffrey, do I have 2 more minutes at least?
2 more minutes maximum, please.
Okay, thank you. Can I go on to the next case study? This is one in which we were able to help or give information to the Mauritian Revenue Authority, the tax authority, and basically it just shows a little bit of egg on the face. It's a real world case. The anti-corruption agency received an anonymous report which that somebody had amassed so much wealth. They did not take any action, and after a year they referred the matter to us. but the alleged unexplained wealth fell beneath our limit. And so we essentially filed and forgot it until we received an anonymous report, which then showed that, in fact, this person had wealth that was within our limit. So we got egg on our face. Last slide, please, Sid, if you'd be so kind. So over the last 15 months, we've served 3 statutory requests on the owner of this cash-intensive business, wastewater carrier. I'm 90% sure that he's gainfully employed, but that's not enough, because he's provided us with copious documents, but no coherent kinds of stories. He has a property portfolio which is funded by his companies. So we referred the matter to the tax authority, which thanked us. We always reciprocate when we receive information from the tax authority and vice versa. They gratefully received a substantial tax assessment on him. And to be truthful, I want the case to go away now. And I'm saying we're doggedly, I think the word is grimly, we're trying to up the verification rate so that we can really have no doubt whatsoever that there is not an illicit source of funds in addition to the gainful employment. And that's it, Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Paul. That was another example, and I like the way you presented the thing with the enthusiasm as well, though. Yeah, there's a number of one question that's come up on the chat is what was the best source of information for detecting some of these cases, Paul?
Yes, it's the police mainly, and the FIU and the tax authority. They're the 3 agencies that we most closely relate to. The anti-corruption agency does not generally refer cases to us. They're involved in money laundering, really, and of course anti-corruption. So the money laundering aspect, it's a difficult one. In fact, we've had to take them to the Supreme Court to get a decision, a judicial review of their attitude, because they take the view that if you can explain wealth, then it's no longer unexplained. But an explanation is not what we're looking for. We're looking for a satisfactory account. And a satisfactory account can only be that is funded from your lawful emoluments or other legal sources. So it's mainly the police who are involved in the drug seizures, and it's mainly the FIU for intelligence and the tax authority.
I mean, it's just a question I would have as well. In terms of the information that you get from these different agencies, which are the most reliable? I mean, I've sometimes heard people say that, where if you compare with these special the transaction reports that you get from the FIU sometimes, when you get information from a tax authority, generally the success rate is pretty high. And I think that's because tax authorities have the nose. Yeah? They can smell things happening. Is that your experience as well?
Yes, we find that the tax authority referrals are top notch, and if we're able to refer something to them, they're very expeditious. They get on with it, and we get feedback backwards and forwards. So I'm able, as the agency head, I'm able to refer matters without worrying about any aspect of confidentiality. We keep our work confidential, but if I think it's in the interest of detecting or preventing crime, and tax crime is a tax crime, then I'm basically free to share it with other agencies. Obviously, there's a limit, but I can share it. So, and vice versa with the Mauritian Revenue Authority, it's easier for them to share information with us. And we use it for intelligence. We don't try and put it into an unexplained wealth application, but it helps us, it guides us. It's very useful.
And you answered one of the other questions on the chat about confidentiality. Are there any other questions for Paul? Any other comments? If not, then why don't we move on? In fact, I mean, are there any questions on the whole presentation that's been made in the last hour and a half? Any clarifications that people would like to have?
Jeffrey, I saw one or two questions on which I had possible
go ahead and pick them
responses.
up. Yeah.
I mean, I saw the question about confidentiality in the chat. Definitely, I mean, there are various methods, of course, to ensure that there are no confidentiality issues that will hamper the conduct of this all of government approaches. But what I would underline is that it is extremely important that countries have legal frameworks, legislation, regulations that have legal value and that definitely indicate who can share information, how, when, and in which conditions, you know. So that's extremely important, because indeed, if there is no legal framework, all can be debated in the end, you know, when you go to courts, definitely. And sometimes you can have bad surprises when you go to court, and that's when a defendant is going to raise issues of confidentiality, respect of human rights, of guarantee of due process guarantees, and all these things. So I think definitely a good reform, in my opinion, a good reform for jurisdictions is to ensure that the legal framework is well established in accordance with the Constitution, and that is very important. I also, by the way, and it is a little bit linked, Jeffrey, just of one word, I saw a very interesting post in the discussion on the need to, I mean, the difficulty to start from a tax case and to continue with a corruption case or a money laundering case. And indeed, it is an overall idea that we can try to apply in the government, but sometimes it cannot be done in the same case. Okay, meaning that you are starting a case on taxation, for example, on a tax crime, and you find something on corruption or on money laundering, maybe you would have to open another case, a parallel investigation, how the author of the post indicated, and have a separate case that will be coordinated by the prosecution authorities, but that would be different, because indeed, if you start to add too many layers in the same process, that can also be a source of bad surprises sometimes. So I completely agree with the person who posted this text. And it is a huge issue, by the way, and I say that I know that Yara is here for the organization of training also. That would be also a very, very interesting issue to discuss in training or in discussions with our clients on how to do that. Because here, if you do it in a bad way, you can end up completely missing the target and having the procedure sometimes annulled, or because you are trying to catch too many rabbits, if I can express myself like that, in the same with the same trap. Okay, that was it. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Agnes, you want to come in, please? And then we'll have Yara.
Yes, I just wanted to ask Dominic. I was interested in the laws that the legal platform that is enhancing the interagency cooperation. Because as far as our legal processes, or the laws that we have, because we have the Tax Procedure Code and the Custom Management Act, which actually has sections that we quote when we are requesting for information. But I just wanted him to give a highlight on what that legal mandate that is Kenya is using that warrants all the agencies actually to work together.
Dominic, do you want to answer that one? You could have a look at the book as well.
Thank you.
We actually deal with that in the book.
Thank you.
Dominic,
Sorry, Prof. Can I go ahead?
You've gone out for a moment.
Yes, I can proceed.
We now hear you, yes?
All right. I think I was losing Prof. The voice was getting thinner. Yes, thank you, Agnes, for that question. And it's true. Our exchange of information at the national level is at 2 levels. Like I said, we have 8 permanent members of interagency cooperation that make up the whole government approach. And the only thing we're left with is what Mr. Rao was pointing to about the fusion centers. That's the only thing that we're now testing to see if it can work. But in the meantime, we have the formal and the informal. And obviously formal is the easiest. But before we go into the specific informalities, let me speak about the law to be more direct. We have the POCAMLA, is the Process of Crime and Money Laundering Act, which is the mother, it's a legislation that deals with money laundering and illicit financial flows. The FRC and the Asset Recovery Agency, the Financial Reporting Center is our FIU. And the Asset Recovery Agency are the 2 institutions which were created by this law of Process of Money Laundering and Act. So that statute, section 55, is one that obligates or mandates the agencies involved in the fight against corruption and money laundering to cooperate. And the wording is they shall cooperate. So that is what we use for now. Now, going further into the question actually, so that which is related to what Agnes is asking, or somebody is suggesting that we should have a legal basis. We can't go beyond that for one reason, that the 8 institutions, from the anti-corruption to police to Kenya Revenue Authority, Central Bank, they all have their statutes which created them. They have specific mandates. They are created under different ministries. So getting one law, it will usurp all those mandates, and that will bring a lot of conflicts. Therefore, we're only safe with that section as the agencies are left dealing with their specific mandates. But now, you see, in addition to this section, instead of going the long way of creating one law for everything, the 8 agencies, they are seated in the highest office in the land. The secretariat sits in the office of the president. And here, the agencies have, the heads of those institutions have committed into one document called the binding document, the marked binding document, where all of them have signed. There's an entire framework, which is about 6-8 pages, and I can read for a copy. This one spells the specifics of how we coordinate, how we share the information, and as informal as it sounds, it is so binding that no one wants to be found on the wrong side if we are fighting corruption as a whole government. And that's the whole idea in whole government approach. So none of us wants to drop the ball, otherwise he'll be cited as the one pulling back.
Yeah.
So that is how we have structured. Thank you.
I think that sounds like you have a very thorough system. And perhaps it would be
Thank
good
you.
if you can share this 68-page document with us, and we'll give it to the other people around if it's not a confidential document. Yara, the last question, please make it short.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to follow up to what Jean-Pierre said before about starting a corruption investigation and also adding tax charges to the investigation. I think I completely agree with everything he said. It can add a number of layers that could make things complicated, but at the same time, approaching the same case from different angles is also a good strategy, even if we're not pursuing criminal charges all around, but we're using whatever tools we have available, can be a very good strategy to go after the bad guys, right? So I think what Jean-Pierre said is absolutely on point. I do want to share an example of a case that I had in my prosecuting days when we started a case under corruption charges. The defendant actually claimed that the bribes that he received, that he had received those in his capacity as a private attorney, and that those were fees that he had received. And so at the end of the investigation, what we did is that we added, our legislation allowed us to add an alternative charges. And so we also charged him with tax crimes because obviously he didn't pay his taxes on his bribe payments. And so in a way, for us, it was a way to kind of put him in a corner where he was like, well, is it a bribe or is it, or did you not pay your taxes, right? So it was a way in which we were able to use both. So I think what I'm trying to say is there isn't an answer to each and every single case, as you all know, but sometimes just thinking a little bit outside the box is the right way to go. But I think this whole of government approach idea doesn't necessarily mean that we have to charge them with every single offense. It just that we have different tools in our toolbox that we can use. And can absolutely, go for whatever tools you have in your toolbox.
Go for whatever is going to be most effective. Yeah. Look, I know we're running a little bit over time, but it was just an interesting debate. I didn't want to cut it off, but I think now just a few concluding comments. One, I'd like to thank Jean-Pierre and Yara and Sid, in fact, for putting in so much work, and Anna to getting this program out, the book get out. I'd like to thank our colleagues from Uganda, Kenya, and Mauritius for presenting their case studies. Three very interesting countries, I think, from the perspective of this topic. Thibaut and our team for setting the whole thing up. It's not been easy, but he did a very good job. What I took, in fact, from the presentations and particularly from the questions in the chat, this whole question of interagency cooperation is a very live question. It's a very key issue. Everybody wants to get a whole of government approach. In practice, sometimes it's not always that easy to achieve. Yeah, although I must admit, the three countries that have made their presentations, it seems to be working quite effectively. Yeah. I think I speak for the World Bank and for Vienna in saying we see this book not as the end, but the start of a debate. There's a lot going on in this field. It's good to exchange experiences of what's been successful, what has not been successful. In terms of taking the debate forward, we will share the slides because some people have asked for that, so we'll do that. Thibaut, if you could note that. The other thing is obviously we're hearing from Yara and Jean-Pierre. The World Bank, in fact, has quite a substantial program in the area of capacity building, and that's one of the key limitations that countries face in this area. They don't have the capacity to actually implement some of the rules. And I think from what I've heard about the experience of the seminar in the workshop in Nairobi, it was a very successful one. So maybe we should think about having similar seminars in Latin America and Asia, because there's a need certainly for that type of dialogue in those regions as well. We in Vienna will continue to pursue our program with African countries on countering all forms of illicit financial flows. There we are looking at the continued debate on interagency cooperation, the unexplained wealth orders, which I think is a very powerful tool, a very difficult tool to handle, but a very powerful tool that more countries should be looking at. The questions of beneficial ownership. We've got the rules, so the problem of implementation. A client attorney privilege, nobody's mentioned that today, but that's an issue as well. And I think one of the questions that comes through a lot of our work is, what role is there for technology in trying to improve the fight against these illicit flows? And I think my feeling is that technology, in fact, can provide some real answers that all countries can use, no matter what their level of development. Yeah. So an interesting debate. Jean-Pierre, I don't know whether you want to have some concluding comments you want to make.
Oh, thank you very much, Jeffrey. I would just, I mean, a very simple concluding comment is to remind our colleagues and that the book is available and it can be downloaded for free on the Stolen Asset Recovery website. In the chat, we have sent the link to go to the book. So that's important. Everybody can very quickly, in a few seconds, read it. I mean, not read it.
A few days read it, maybe a few seconds get it, yeah?
Read it and think about it a lot, I hope. So that's one thing. The second thing is that, as you said, indeed, for us, it's very important first to have this cooperation with your global tax center in Vienna. It's definitely an excellent addition of competencies and experiences. Third, that we are going to continue to use our findings in an integrated approach to technical assistance, specifically with the program that was mentioned by Yara, not only in East Africa, but probably also at some point in Asia and in other regions of the world. So really, thank you very much. And there was, I saw that there was also a question. I mean, I'm sorry, I say goodbye to everybody, but I let you again the last word. Because there was also a question on the recording of the, you said that you would share the slides, and I saw that there was a question on the recording of the event. I don't know if it is your practice to share recordings, but
Thibaut, did we record the event or
yes, not? Yes, it is being recorded as we speak.
So we can do that. And perhaps just a last comment from me. We'll have a similar launch event, in fact, in Vienna on the 18th of January. With the Joint Vienna Initiative, which is an IMF-sponsored program. That'll be primarily, in fact, for countries in what I call the former Soviet Union countries. And then there'll be another launch program, well, another seminar on the same topic in Washington on the 25th of January. Yeah? So we'll continue this debate, trying to get people, in fact, engaged in the outcome from the book. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for that. It's been a fascinating discussion. I've learned a lot, yeah, which is great. And also what really impressed me was the enthusiasm of the people that work in this area, from the very young to the very old. Paul, you and I are in the very old category, yeah? So anyway, take care, everybody. Thanks again. Have a nice week, yeah?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care.
Thank you,
Bye.
Jeffrey. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you, Sid. Thank you for everything.
Bye, Paul.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody. And thank you. À la prochaine.